There is a particular kind of suffering that almost no one talks about. It is not the suffering of hardship itself. It is the suffering of sitting inside that hardship alone, knowing full well that someone could help you and choosing not to ask. Brené Brown has spent over 2 decades studying human connection. She has interviewed hundreds of people across the United States about shame, vulnerability, and what it means to live a whole life. And one of the patterns she kept running into, one of the quieter wounds she kept finding beneath everything else was this. People were drowning in silence because asking for help felt worse than the drowning itself. Think about the last time you genuinely needed help. Not a small favor, real help. Help with your mental health, your finances, your relationship, your grief. Now think about what stopped you from asking. If you are honest, it probably was not that there was no one to ask. It was something else, a voice, a feeling. The worry that asking would mean something about you, that it would confirm something you were already afraid was true. Brené Brown has a name for that feeling. She calls it shame. And she would tell you that shame is the reason the bravest thing some people will do all year is send a text that says, "I'm not okay. Can we talk?" Here's what this video is actually about. It is not a tutorial on how to ask for help in 5 easy steps. Brené Brown would never reduce something this human to a checklist. What this video is about is the architecture underneath the resistance, the story you tell yourself about what needing help means, where that story came from, and what it costs you to keep believing it. Because here's the thing Brené Brown found in her research. The people who could ask for help were not the ones who had less pride. They were not weaker or less disciplined. They had simply learned something that most of us were never taught. They had learned that vulnerability is not the same as weakness, that needing others is not a character flaw, that the story our culture tells about self-sufficiency is in many ways a story that makes us sicker and lonelier than we need to be. That is what you are going to understand by the end of this. The independence myth. Brené Brown grew up in a culture, as most of us did, that treated self-sufficiency as a kind of virtue. Pull yourself up, figure it out, don't burden anyone. She noticed something in her research that troubled her. When she asked people to describe their most shame-filled experiences, needing help came up again and again. Not failure, not mistakes, the act of needing. People felt shame about asking their parents for money in their 30s, about calling a friend during a breakdown, about telling a doctor the truth about how much they were drinking. That shame does not appear from nowhere. It is learned, and the teacher, more often than not, is the culture around independence that runs deep in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. A culture where self-reliance is celebrated and dependence is treated as something to overcome, where being low maintenance is a compliment, where people say, "I'm fine," as a kind of performance, long before they feel it. The practical takeaway here is not comfortable, but it is worth sitting with. If you feel shame when you need help, that shame is not evidence that you are a burden. It is evidence that you absorbed a set of beliefs about what makes a person worthy. And beliefs, unlike facts, can be examined and changed. Shame needs secrecy to survive. Brené Brown has said this in several interviews and across her books. Shame cannot survive being spoken. That is not poetry. That is something she observed across hundreds of qualitative interviews. Shame depends on silence. It feeds on isolation. The moment you speak it out loud to someone who responds with empathy rather than judgment, something shifts. She tells a story, a version of which appears in her work on vulnerability, about a woman who had gone through a miscarriage and told no one, not her closest friend, not her sister, because she felt that somehow the loss was tied to something she had done wrong. That asking for support would mean exposing that wrongness. When she finally told someone, months later, the response was not judgment. It was, "Me too." And that woman said it was the most healing moment of that entire year. That is how shame works. You assume you are alone in it. You protect yourself from exposure, and in doing so, you accidentally protect the shame as well. The practical shift Brené Brown invites is this. Find one person who has earned the right to hear your story. Not everyone, not a public confession. Just one person who has shown you through their own behavior that they can hold something difficult without flinching. Start. Asking for help requires a story worth telling. One of the quieter insights in Brené Brown's research is that our ability to ask for help is connected to the story we believe about our own worth. If somewhere underneath everything you believe you are too much or not enough or fundamentally flawed, then asking for help becomes dangerous. Because what if the person you ask agrees? What if their refusal or their impatience or their silence confirms the thing you were already afraid was true? Brené Brown calls this foreboding joy. But the same mechanism runs through asking for help. You don't ask because you are on some level already bracing for the confirmation of your worst belief about yourself. What she found in the people she calls wholehearted, those who lived and loved with their full selves, is that they had done the slow, sometimes painful work of separating their worthiness from their circumstances. They believed they were worthy of help before they had proof of it. That is not arrogance. That is the precondition for genuine connection. The practical takeaway, the next time you stop yourself from asking for help, pause and ask yourself what you are actually afraid of, not the surface answer. Go one level deeper. What would it mean about you if you asked and they said no? That belief, whatever it is the real thing standing between you and connection. Receiving is its own skill. Brené Brown makes a distinction that most people miss. Asking for help and receiving help are not the same act. A lot of people will ask and then immediately minimize. Sorry, this is probably nothing. I shouldn't have brought this up. Don't worry about it, I'll figure it out. That is not vulnerability. That is the performance of vulnerability with a trapdoor built in, so you can escape before anyone actually gets close. Receiving help means staying in the discomfort long enough to let someone show up for you. It means saying thank you. That means a lot instead of deflecting. It means letting the support land. Brené Brown found again and again that the people who were best at giving help were often the worst at receiving it. And that asymmetry is itself a form of disconnection, because if you can only ever be the helper, you are quietly positioning yourself above the people you care about. You are protecting yourself from the equality that real intimacy requires. The practical shift here is small, but not easy. The next time someone offers help, accept it fully, without the qualifying apology. Brené Brown once said that connection is why we are here, that it gives purpose and meaning to our lives. And she meant that seriously, with the weight of 20 years of data behind it. But here is something worth sitting with as this video ends. Connection is not built in the moments when everything is fine. It is built in the moments when things are not fine. And you let someone know, that text at midnight, that phone call where your voice breaks before you even finish the first sentence, that moment in the doctor's office when you finally tell the truth. Those are not your weakest moments. In Brené Brown's understanding, those are some of your most courageous ones. The culture will keep telling you to handle it yourself, to be self-sufficient, to not be a burden. That voice will not go away overnight, but you can begin to question it. You can begin to notice when it shows up and ask whether it is actually protecting you or just keeping you alone. Asking for help is not the end of your independence. It is the beginning of your capacity for real connection. And real connection, Brené Brown spent a career arguing, is the thing most of us are actually looking for underneath everything else we chase. If something in this video landed for you, take a moment to like it and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next on this channel. And leave a comment with this. What is one area of your life where you have been struggling in still? Ins that you haven't let anyone in on yet, you don't have to share the details. Just naming it even here is a start. This channel is not affiliated with Brené Brown or any of her official representatives. The content you just watched is educational in nature, inspired by the publicly available teachings, writings, and interviews of Brené Brown. It does not constitute professional advice. Before making any major decision in this area, please do your own research and consult a qualified professional.